Hello and welcome back to the second to final module that we have on creating single page applications using jQuery and AngularJS. I'm David Voiles and I'm joining Stacey Mulcahy here this fine afternoon. As you've seen in the past, we've gone over our jQuery content, how to debug applications, and we just started to touch on how to actually create Angular apps. And in this specific module, Stacey's going to go into actual code base and converting a lot of this code from a jQuery application over into Angular. So with that in mind, Stacey, why don't you give us a quick overview of what's coming up? Yeah, we're going to actually start getting right into it with code, which is pretty exciting. So we're going to talk about starting an AngularJS application, what do you need to do, and that, what's involved there. We're going to look at understanding data binding. We're going to look at the concept of a module and a controller as it relates to our app. Once again, our app's very simple, so we're keeping it simple. And then we're going to talk about getting and posting data using HTTP, using one of the options that we have from Angular. And as we go throughout this, I'm going to try to show you just little things about Angular along the way that's not listed in here. That's just little things that you can do, show, hide elements, that kind of thing. So setting up an Angular application. Right? Once you want to start with an Angular application, the first thing you need to do is you need to go over and you need to look at the library. And I'm going to include the framework from a CDN. Okay. And I'm going to talk about just initializing the root of the application and what the ng-app actually means. So with that in mind, let's just get started. And I'm going to, what I've already done is I've taken Dave's jQuery example. I've got my finished one in Angular. I took your jQuery and I put it into just dev, and I'm going to work out of dev. So I'm going to do my best at just kind of live coding this and seeing how it goes along. All right, let's try it out. So wish me luck. I've got some notes in case. So first thing we're going to do here is if we're looking at the site, let's just run it. We see that these things are, listed. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to take this item, stop, and I am going to remove the previous library stuff. I don't need the jQuery. Right. I don't need the basic script to any of those kind of things. Okay. So I'm just going to save, remove that. Be off with you. Yep. Save that. Make sure that I'm working in the right file. Yes. Okay. Beautiful. And what I want to do is I want to go over to the Angular site, and I'm going to, if you just hit up angularjs.org, again, you can just view it on GitHub if you want, but you'll see that there's all sorts of resources, there's all sorts of documentation, there's everything that you can possibly imagine. There's a rationale of why you'd use it, extensibility, all sorts of stuff. I just want to go and download it. I'm not going to actually run it locally. I'm going to run it, through reference. So I'm going to click that link, select in here, select all, copy. And what I'm going to do, sorry, it's not what I wanted. What I'm going to do is go back, and maybe I'll just undo that script here because I'm lazy. Got my script tag. Let's remove this bottom one. Let's remove this one. That way I don't have to write it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to point that source to the actual Angular source. And you can see that it's minified. It gives you the version number. This is one of the nice things you'll start to see within the community in JavaScript is you'll see that they often include the numbers in their file names or anything along that sort. And I'm going to, now that I have the library installed or included, what I want to do is I'm just going to, again, test it. And I'm going to bring up the F12. Whoa. I've got, okay, caching. Caching is my friend. That's right. There we go. Caching, my friends, is your friend. And I'm going to look, once again, remember these are we're already in the DOM So when we were talking with Dave and he was doing jQuery, he said, oh, I have 2 items in the DOM and everything else I'm basically pulling in. And so I'm going to look at the network traffic, and I'm just going to be a little crazy this way. I'm going to load it in, shift return, load it in again, and I'm going to make sure that I'm getting that library. So I see that that library is being loaded.
Perfect.
So I'm pretty much good to go.
Okay.
Right. So now that I've got the library, I can go and I can start to create this app. So the first thing you need to do is you need to create that bootstrapping point, and that's the ng-app.
Yeah.
Now, you can only have one ng-app per kind of HTML page.
Okay.
If you want to use it that way. If you want to have multiple applications in your page,
Yes.
2 rules. One, they can't be nested,
Okay.
right? And the other one is that you have to manually kind of go and do that bootstrapping yourself.
Okay.
And so there's a property on Angular, it's angular.bootstrap, and
Yep.
you can do it that way. Whether or not you should be doing that, whole nother discussion,
Yeah.
right? But I'm sure
Best
there's
practices,
a
right?
case for it. Usually, ng-app will show up in a very top-level node, whether it be your HTML node, whether it be your body. It tends to be one of the more top-level ones because it's the idea that it's kind of like taking that entire page. So I'm going to do ng-app, and just by doing that, what's going to happen is that when I load the page, you're not going to see anything, exactly happen here because we haven't added any functionality or any kind of benefit from the framework. But it sees that ng.app and it says, okay, this is my starting point. I need to start initializing things here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. And by creating a variable, I'm going to bind to it. So I'm going to kind of show you maybe not the proper way of adding a little bit of data or that model to the page, but I want to show you kind of how that actually works and, in terms of, making sure that these items are being instantiated correctly. So in here, I'm going to do basically an H2, and because I like repeating H2s, and I'm going to write some text.
Okay.
Whoops, sorry. Here I'm going to basically just go ng-init, and I'm going to init a variable. Once again, typically, any kind of variables that you're trying to init to the scope or to the context of this, we should be doing in a controller, which I'll show, but this can just get us up and running. And so, put content here. Okay, so this isn't going to do much, but ng-init allows you to basically instantiate a variable. I called it hello, and it is equal to world. Really, really original there, right? But if I want to bind it, what I should do is where my content is, and let's say I want to replace the content there, right? Or maybe I want to do it here. It doesn't really matter where I want to do it. I need to use the double curlies, and what I need to do is give it the variable name. So in theory, I created a variable with ng-init called hello. It's equal to world, right? And it's got that hello kind of syntax with the double brackets, which means I'm binding it. Now in theory, let's see what happens. Shift. You see that it now shows up as world.
Okay.
Right? So if I go in and I change this, and I say hello, and I say Mr. Voiles, which I can't even spell your name right.
You're not the first one to butcher it.
Yes.
Okay.
My life is complete, right? Woohoo! Points for butchering your name. If I look at it like this, you'll see that it starts to, you know what I mean?
That.
So you see that quickly, you now know that it's been instantiated, that ng-app is working, that you have all of these things going along, and that you can now initialize a variable, you can bind to it. I can do it in one place. I could do it, here as well if I wanted to go hello, right? So you could have it in multiple places if you want.
Okay.
And let me just bring up my browser. I just prefer to refresh. Shift refresh, And you can see that, you know, again, multiple items can be bound to it. So it's not a one-to-one relationship at all. It's basically anywhere you need it, you can start to use it. So having gone through that, it gives you a sense that, okay, Angular is going through, and I'm just going to delete this because we don't want to do it necessarily that way, but it's great for just showing you how it works. Angular is really great in terms of, you know, just adding stuff in and then binding it. And once again, what it does is that bootstrapping, it finds the ng app. And what you can do with ng app, which we're going to do next, but you can associate a module with ng app. So that's kind of your entry point in terms of code. So you might have a module for it, and you can give it a name, and it'll look for it, and it'll find it, and it'll associate it with it. But it'll look for this item, and at this point, it goes through every single item in the DOM, and anything that it saw that had any kind of relationship to Angular in terms of the declarative markup, it will figure out what to do. It'll make those data bindings. It will do all that kind of good stuff, right? So you can start to kind of like play with it and start using it in those ways and seeing like, here's how I know that it's getting instantiated. So going back to my slides, you know, the other thing that we have to talk about is data binding. And I gave that example of creating a basic variable and binding it to one item, etc. But what about if you had input and you wanted to make sure that it was completely always being updated?
Two-way.
Right. So I'm going to just demo the same thing. And once again, we're not going to get into the modules, into the controllers. I'm just showing you just very basic functionality. And I'm going to show you just an input that binds to that so that you get a sense of like, this is where you're starting to see a little bit more of the power behind it. So, you know, data binding in Angular, it's two-way. And so you get this automatic synchronization of data between model and view, right? And often you can do this through something that's considered, you know, ng model. So going back, let me do that again, and hopefully, let's create
IntelliSense. I like it.
IntelliSense. So ng init hello is equal to world. Okay, let's just go hello. So I'm binding it. Okay. Nothing different than we did the last time, right? But this time, let's add in an input form. Input. Okay. And here, I am going to set its model to be hello. So in theory, if this is done correctly, and I always say in theory because I always feel like every time you live code, it's got to be like, in theory.
That's right.
This should, you know, work that way. So again, need to refresh. And then you see it's already populated with world. So if I start typing in Dave is here and please something, you know, please say hello to the lovely Dave, you start to see that it is, you know, it's automatically updating.
I like it.
So that's where you kind of get the power of those items. Imagine how much jQuery you'd have to write for that.
Figure that out.
Because you would have to figure out if there's a change on the input field. And then you'd have to figure out, is that change a real change? If it's a change, do I update something else? And so think about all the code you have to write versus what I had to do.
Yeah, it might even take a little while for it to actually propagate and update to the page. I mean, this way you can just have a conversation with yourself the whole time.
Hi, what's for dinner? Right? But it's one of those things where, you know, when you think about in comparison of what I write versus what you write, it's very, very simple. All right, so let's, again, you know, two-way data binding, it's very, very simple. And it's one of the beautiful things there where, you know, you automatically get it. It's out of the box. And all I did was put a couple, you know, basically attributes, for lack of a better term. And boom, Angular is doing all the kind of work in the background. So now we're going to look at creating kind of like a simple module. And the reason why you want to create a module is because you'll be able to kind of put your chunk of code or your business logic into a chunk of code and, you know, write it all there and have it kind of work and not have too much of a problem with it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to just write a simple module, and then we're going to write a simple controller. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is that often in Angular, people have very, very strict kind of file structures. They'll put all their controllers in one place, all their modules in one place.
Okay.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm not doing that.
We're just winging it.
I'm making it one file because it's very, very simple. It's not, enough to really go through that.
Yeah.
But you definitely will see that, and it's great because you know that any of that stuff, you know where it belongs.
Yep.
So I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be a JavaScript file, and I am going to call it main app JavaScript, and I need to add it so it gets added right there. Okay, and in here, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a module. And so I'm just going to copy and paste so that I don't screw this up and not have to worry about it too much. But basically, and I can talk about the syntax a little bit more. Oops, that's not how I wanted it to look, but that's okay. So basically, what you want to do is you want to go angular.module, and then you give it a name. So we're going to call ours main app, right? And then you give it any kind of dependencies that it needs. And so for our kind of function, that I'm looking at, we don't necessarily need anything along those lines. And oh, okay, nice. So, when I'm looking at those kind of things, I'm not too worried about any of the dependencies that I need to worry. It's just main app, and what I can do is I can go back into the HTML,
Okay.
and I can associate our ng-app with it. And it will know where to look. Now, the thing that we have to do as well here is we're going to have to include it,
Okay.
right? So again,
And we'll script at the bottom there.
Script source is equal to, and if I'm looking at it, it is going to be assets. Nope, sorry, I'm on 2 lines here. There we go. Assets, right? And the beauty, okay, shows up, and I have main-app.js. Right? So in theory, this should work.
Okay.
So we got assets. Does that look right, that path? Not finding it.
Main assets, or dev/assets. Yeah. Oh, it actually shouldn't be in assets at all, because looking at, it's in the dev folder, right?
Yep, sorry, you're right. Thanks. Whoops. Okay, so clumsy. Here we go. So, there we go. Awesome. It should always just fill it out for you. So as soon as it doesn't, I'm like, there's something not happening here.
Yeah. Or you can just drag and drop from the Solution Explorer as well.
True. So, you can go through and you can see, once again, I'm going to bring up my F12 tools, and I'm going to shift refresh, and I'm going to hit my network to make sure that things are loading, because I'm a little crazy that way. I can see that it's loaded. I have no problems with it being loaded. So now we have a module that's associated, but it's not really doing anything. But we've started out kind of with our structure of what this app might be.
Okay.
So what we need to do now is we need to add in our controller syntax. And so we can just add our controller onto our main app.
All right.
And so an easy way to do that in Angular is to, and again, I'm just going to copy so that I, don't kind of screw up what we're doing.
Yep.
Is you get the controller, and I can close this, right?
There we go.
And that should be good in theory.
Passing in the scope.
Okay, and so now I have a controller called main controller. And if I'm looking at this, what you do with the controller is I'm just adding the controller onto this module, and then I'm saying, here's the function and the scope. You can decide what's going to get injected into the main controller.
Yeah.
So Angular provides you with a scope object, and it's basically the content or the context you're working in.
It's like saying this, basically.
Yeah, it's saying like you're going to operate in this context.
So this view model. Or yeah, this view, I should say.
Exactly. And for HTTP, that's another where it gives you accessibility to have those resources where you can call and make things.
That's right.
So you start adding in this list here of things that you want to kind of inject. Some of it, is obviously going to be made available to you through Angular. Some of them you might have to register, those kind of things. But you can see that all that stuff's made available to you.
Oh yeah, there's quite a few you can use. HTTP backend, provider, route parameters.
Right. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fix up our whole hello world example. And I'm going to say, okay, scope's being passed in. Oops, sorry. Scope's being passed in. And I just want to append a variable to it.
Okay.
It's going to be called hello. And I'm just going to say world. And so instead of putting that in the DOM with, let's indent this. Instead of putting that in the DOM with, ng init, this keeps it cleaner. It's in a controller, right? And so now I have my module, my main app, and I have my controller with the function and the scope. And you can start to see those things being, a little bit more organized, if you will. Now, if I go back into here, let's save it. It doesn't help if you don't save it. And then I start to look at, where we are in main app. I need to now basically tell it where my controller is going to be. And so that's why you usually have one point or one module for your main app.
Yep.
But you can have multiple controllers. So we're going to write one controller, but I could have many controllers if I wanted.
A lot of different ways to organize it too.
Sure.
Folder structure.
You might have one for your form. You might have one for another section. You might have one for the carousel, right? So, pardon me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically put on the body, just for now, is ng controller, and I'm going to call it main controller, because that's what I called it previously.
Okay.
Right? So hopefully what's going to happen is that this module gets loaded, it sees that app, it associates this file with it, and then I've basically said there's a controller that's kind of living within this app.
Okay.
It's called main controller. And here's a function, and here's what's being passed in, and I've got a variable, and it's called hello world. So what I should be able to do is I should be able to, even if I just did it here, go hello, right? In theory.
Okay.
Again, so much in theory.
Hopefully it'll resolve this variable. Okay.
And yeah, hopefully.
We have our main
Fingers
controller,
crossed, right?
Scope in there.
We've got what we need.
Let's see what this hello object says.
And
Caching?
yeah, caching.
Whoa, there we go.
And world, right?
I like it.
So what we can do is we go back to here. It's always like that moment where it works and you're like, oh, yes, right?
Celebration.
You go back and, no matter how many times you've done this, if you're live code and you got that moment.
That's right. Calls for the vuvuzela.
Yeah, totally.
It's like scoring a goal.
Okay, every time you do something right, you got to do that.
That's right.
So you'll see I changed it. I changed it in the main app.js. I said, oh yes, and now it's being referenced here. So I moved it out of the DOM from ng init into a controller.
Yep.
And I put the controller on the body because this is very simple, but you might have a controller, like I said, multiple controllers for various things. Mm-hmm. It allows you to just handle the business logic.
Right.
Right, so we're going to start to write a lot more business logic here.
All business all the time.
Right, and you shouldn't have reams and reams and reams of code in your controller necessarily.
No.
Right, try to always think of things as small, manageable units. Mm-hmm. So, going back to this, let's see what's next on our list of things to do. So we have, all right, so did that. So we created a controller, and I showed you the basic idea of creating a controller, and you have ng controller. And like I said, controllers should hold business logic. You can have controller for a single view.
Yeah.
Now, remember, a view necessarily isn't the entire page.
That's right.
Right? A view could be a list element item.
That small section where we want the controller to be relevant to. That's scope, essentially.
Yeah, sure. It can be as small as one little thing, like a button, for example.
Yeah.
It can be a section.
Yeah.
It can be, any of those kind of things. Controllers often will set up the initial state for those items, right? But you don't use them to necessarily manipulate the DOM directly. You're not writing some DOM manipulation logic in there. If you're doing any of that kind of stuff, you got to think more towards what we're not going to cover, unfortunately, but it's directives.
Yes.
Because I'm going to show you just the easy way to get things kind of hooked up with your data and everything else. Okay, so creating a controller, once again, wrap small kind of units and you'll do well with that. So we showed module and controller, right? I walked through module and controller. So I'm going to move next, and it's going to be dealing with data, right? So we're going to talk about, I've got this list. There's a bunch of things we need to do. Right? So in terms of what we need to do in this page so that I can get up to speed with you, okay, I need to basically populate that list. So I need to get the data and populate the list. I need to look at that form and figure out how to submit something. I need to be able to submit the data to the list, right? So we're going to look at basic introduction to how you can kind of get and post data. There's a lot of options. You can use like resources and services, and we're not going to talk about being necessarily synced right with the server and those kind of things. We're just going to show you basic stuff. And we're going to utilize dependency injection for this again. So this is where I'm going to start to walk through some of the form stuff. I'm going to probably work with the form a little bit first and start setting that stuff up, setting a default value for it. Maybe show a little bit of like really out-of-the-box validation stuff, or at least point towards to it, right? And kind of show you what Angular has all within it. So we're going to walk through this part quite a bit, and it's going to be all about building out that controller and getting that data from the form, into the database or into our mobile service, getting the data back. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time here in Visual Studio.
I like Visual Studio.
So so what we want to do is, let's just start out by, if we look at our index HTML and I bring it up, let's start out by just giving like a kind of default value to these items. So I'm going to deal with just the simplicity of just dealing with the form, not submitting data quite yet, but just, can we put a default item in here? Can we put a default message or something? How do we, worry about this click event? So we're going to work on that. And then I'm going to go to this and how do we populate this? So I'm going to show you things like templating. I'm going to show you how to get a service. And then we're going to hook up this form once we know that this is going. I might also show you how to filter this a little bit. So filtering is really handy, where you just want to click and say, show me everyone from New York. Show me only people with a name that starts with D, or that kind of thing.
Give me this kind of money, give it to me in another currency, or give it to me as a currency.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about just filtering out that list. So when I look at this form, and this is what I'm going to operate on here, right? This form has a name, and it's user form. And what I can start to do is, let's say I want to put some default types into these items. Let's say I just want to have like a default value for whatever reason. Now you could use HTML and use a placeholder, which isn't supported necessarily across all browsers, right? Just to show you the idea of creating another value and binding to it, I'm going to just create some default values here.
I like it.
Okay, so on the scope here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go scope, and let's go user is equal to, live type in, always awesome. And let's go.
I have an object, and we got to fill.
I've got a basic object, and let's say our user, in terms of evangelists that we're getting back, we have location and we have name, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say location, and I'm going to basically write function and write a value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this almost like a getter and a setter, and I'm going to say if Angular is defined. So if value that I'm passing in is defined.
So if it exists, it's there.
Right. If it exists, I'm obviously setting it. Right. So if this exists, I'm setting it.
This is the validation you're talking about before now, right?
Right. So, well, this is some of the stuff that you can do code-wise, but there's stuff that you can definitely do in the DOM. Right. And so I'm going to just say this dot location is
set to
is equal to val, right?
Perfect.
So let's just start with that. And, you know, otherwise, I'm just returning, or, you know, regardless, I'm going to return this dot location.
Yep.
Right? So this is pointing to within location, or sorry, within user. So we should be okay in this instance. And if not, we've got the copy and paste magic.
Let's see how it works.
Right?
I'll give you credit. I mean, your live coding, there's a lot of syntax we have to be wary of here.
I don't know. So I'm like, I don't know.
Let's see.
So let's go ng. So I'm going down to the input form, and I'm saying the model for this item is going to be user.location.
Right.
Right? It's that user object, and I just want the location property from it. And so hopefully, if I've done all this right, and if I refresh, so, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted. Hold on. Live coding does not work. Return this, no wonder. Okay, so what I need to do actually here is I'm going to, I'm just returning that function. That was not smart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go scope dot and kind of create a private variable location, and let's just set a default for now.
Okay.
Right? So I'm going to say if this is defined, set the location
to the value that the user entered.
Right? Otherwise, return it. Okay, in theory, this should not return that function. Otherwise, people, we are copying and pasting. So,
let's try refreshing.
All right, I lied. I've got coding fail, but hold on. Let me copy and paste so I don't waste anyone's time.
That's fine with me. Your love of New York City. Oh, you know what? Did you have this location underscored when you had that before?
Yeah, but you know what? It'll be easier if I do this.
Yeah.
Because I tried to live code. So, okay, so looked at the same kind of thing. Let's just remove this. My code's getting ugly, my friends. I'm sorry.
All right, that's JavaScript for you.
Okay, so I've got a user function, and I'm saying, here's the name. If Angular is defined the name, if this variable is passed in, so Angular, if you go right to Angular, it has a whole bunch of things that you can check on. Angular.bootstrap, like I mentioned before, Angular is defined. There's a whole bunch of functionality.
Okay.
So you set the name is equal to the name, return the name. You know, otherwise, if the location, you know, same thing. Now, I bet on my file, I need to go and set these default variables.
That's right.
Right? And, oops, sorry.
So essentially our little private variables you created. Right?
Yep. And what I'm going to do, right, I've set these private variables, or so-called private just by the underscore.
Yep.
I've got a default name, I've got a default location. I've got a user which got a name and a location. Okay. If this doesn't work, it's day over. Hold on.
It wants to. It's thinking about it.
No, shift, hold on. Maybe it's my cache. Okay.
Let's see what's going on here. So like I said, the cache can commonly be an issue because it's trying to save you trouble. It's trying to say, hey, we're going to keep all that stuff stored locally until you actually need it again. So in this case, Stacy is cleaning out the cache, getting rid of everything that a browser may be storing, so that this way she can restart and take the fresh updates that she just wrote in Visual Studio.
No, it's failing me. It's not liking it. So,
boom!
Boom! I don't know what I've done, my friends, but it's definitely not liking me. So let's get back to that because that's going to be something dead simple. But that gives you the idea, you like how I'm covering that up? It's not working. That gives you the idea of just kind of how that would work and the idea of like, oh, if you're checking if something's defined or if not, you know, not that. So, you know what? Remove this for now. Let's start working on, wow, major fail. Let's start working on just the form. So we got the form name as user form.
Okay.
Let's start working on if it, you know, something happens and it gets submitted.
Okay.
So what this is it's going to be ng submit.
Yep.
And you can basically pass in a function. So I'm going to pass in a function here that should call when it sees that this form's being submitted.
Okay.
Okay. So the other thing you can use is in forms, you can use ng-submit, or to give you a sense, if you guys are kind of following at home, and if you are, then you're like, oh, that didn't work. You can do ng-click as well.
Ooh.
Right? And ng-click, you can kind of route it to a function.
Kind of like an on-click event.
It's like an on-click event.
Okay.
But once again, declarative UI, I know that that is happening in the browser.
That's right. You know there's something tied to that object.
Right. So I've got ng-submit, and I'm just going to say, add user.
Yep.
Okay, and I'm just going to say user because we have a user variable.
Yes.
Right, so right now this isn't going to do anything. It's kind of calling a function that doesn't really exist yet.
Right.
So we need to go back and create that function.
That add user function.
Yeah, that will hopefully work after this one.
I'm confident you got it this time.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function here, and I'm going to say add user.
Yeah. I'm
going to pass in a user, right? And I'm going to just console this out that you showed us before.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that.
Oops.
So you make sure it's getting called every time.
Okay, and I'm just going to say add user, and I'm going to pass in this object. Right, it's probably going to show up as null because we don't really have anything, or it'll show up as the default or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But at least I can see that it's being accessed. Now, the one thing that we need to do here is I just have this function. I need to be able to it's almost like using modules in JavaScript. I need to export it. I need to make it available to the scope. So I need to go scope dot add user is equal to add user. And that's going to make it, available to that scope. So we should be able to go through and, at this point, at least see that that item's being clicked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, shift. So let's bring up my F12. So you can see every time that I select it, it is now saying add user, here's the object. Add user, here's the object, right? So we're starting to get that item now so that you know that you're capturing it. And once again, I didn't put an event handler, didn't use jQuery,
yep.
Didn't use any of that stuff on that button. I could also, if I wanted to, instead of the form here, I could take this, I could get rid of the ng-submit, even though we're going to come back and put it back on.
Okay.
But I could go to the button, and I should be able to go ng-click and do this as well. Get rid of those double quotes because I copied and pasted. And, if I look at that function name, it needs to be a capital. Right, and you will see that once I run this in theory, I always forget to stop it from running when I'm typing.
It happens to the best of us.
If I bring up F12 again, you should see that it's, again, doing it the same way. So either way, however you want to handle that form, you can totally do it one way or the other. But you're getting the idea that it's being clicked. So you can put an ng, click and, the function you want to call, mm-hmm. or you can put it on the form. The important thing to remember when you're doing these things is that in your controller, you need to be able to basically make it public to that scope, to the context that it's going to be trying to access it in. So you need to do that idea of kind of exporting it out.
Okay.
For lack of a better term. So, we kind of have that add user. We should be able to do that, okay? So the next thing we want to do is we want to look at that list item, and we want to prep the list item so that we can use it as a template.
All right.
Right? Because nothing's changing between any of those items.
No,
right?
They're all staying the same.
The data that we got is all coming back, and it's all the same. So what we want to do is I want to go back up to where we're at.
Okay.
And I want to just remove this item because we don't need two of them. Okay. And what I want to do here is I want to go ng repeat. Okay, and what ng repeat does is it basically will repeat this element using it as a template for however many,
items are in that.
Items that you get.
It's almost like using a for each loop. Right?
Yeah, completely. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to write ng repeat now. We're not going to touch anything quite yet because we need to kind of associate it with the model.
Okay.
So we'll come back to ng repeat, but just to know, as soon as you see this is like a repeater. It's a repeating element, right? And so what I want to do in here is the variables, your Dave Voiles, I don't want everyone to be Dave Voiles.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's lovely,
yeah,
right? But I want to change this out so that it's going to be someone's name, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to go person.name.
Okay.
You'll see why I do that in
Which is tied to that scope.
You'll see, yep. We'll get rid of the no breaking space just to be like that. Okay, and then I'm just going to get rid of Philadelphia.
So
and
put a
I'm going to go
variable in there.
Person, location.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so I'm just binding this. Well, where is person coming from? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my model. I'm not necessarily right now going to worry about our service. I'm going to go here and I'm going to create some fake data, right? So that I can test this out. So I'm going to say people is equal to an array of objects.
Yep.
And then these objects, I'm going to kind of emulate what we're getting back from that service.
Location.
Sure. So name, so Stacy.
Kind of creating your little key value pair here.
Sure, and this is just going to fake what's coming back from the service so that I can test something and then implement what I need to do.
Kind of like a little sanity check. Make sure this works before we actually go to the server and make our own content.
Right. So I can go New York City.
Okay.
And I can, create another object, one more just for safekeeping, and I can go name.
Another key, another value.
Dave.
Yeah.
And, oops.
Can I move? Do I have to be in Philadelphia all the time? Can I do like San Diego?
You can be wherever you want to be.
Warmer weather, so.
Where do you want to be today?
San Diego.
San Diego. Okay, so we've got this kind of fake JSON that's very much the same that we're getting back from the mobile services.
Okay.
And it's on a variable that's scope.people.
Yep.
Right, which means that it's available in the context of the scope.
Yep.
Right? And so it has name, location. We've got that. So scope.people is the array of objects.
Yes.
And so for the ng repeat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say person in people.
Okay.
Okay, so person, this is basically almost like creating that for loop that you did.
Yeah.
You did for each item, do this, this, and this. This is the quick way of doing that. Right, and so you do person and people, right? People being the array. For each person, I want the person.name. So person is like each individual object. Give me the name, give me the location.
Yes.
Right? So let's look at running this.
Let us see.
And let's shift refresh. And there you go.
Wow, I like it.
Okay, so you start to see, although my formatting is a little funny, and you can fix that up after the fact.
Our UI is pretty spectacular.
It's banging. Like this UI is just out of control.
We haven't even applied any CSS to it. That's the best part. Just imagine how much better it looks when we actually get to CSS.
Well, the beauty about this kind of thing, and I think people kind of forget about it, they're kind of like, oh, you built an example that looks like this, and it's one of those things where it's like, we're not focusing on the whole package, we're focusing on the parts. So when you're building the infrastructure, get CSS out of the way if you don't have to.
Exactly.
Build your structure, build your HTML, build the behavior and stuff that you might need around it, and then start building do your presentation, then do your behavior, right?
CSS and everything's modular. I mean, you can apply different styles, colors, whatever you need.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, there's a reason why we've kind of done it that way. So you can see that, that's now, going through, and it's going through the people's names and whatever else that we have. Now, okay, so let's take this one step further, right? Mm-hmm. Let's actually use a service and try to get the actual data back that we need.
Okay.
Right? For this, I'm going to copy and paste because there's a couple of things I got to remember, like the key and everything else. So forgive me, but this is where I copy and paste. And so I'm going to need two things in here. All right, and I'm going to do this at the bottom.
Okay.
Just so that, I don't confuse anyone. And then I'm going to write a little
Get name function.
Well, I could write a function, or I could just do this. Let's do get names. Okay, so
I think that config file. Did you close it? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
It's still not liking me. Hold on. Copy and paste doesn't like me. It's not my friend.
Oh, yep. I mean, yeah. So the configuration.
Okay, so
Yeah, see, there were ending headers.
there we go.
Where's configuration end?
So you've got this very basic, config that you're working on. And then the other thing I need, again, is going to be just this call here.
Okay.
Don't need to worry too much about it. I could probably start typing it. And again, the formatting's a little funky, but I'm going to walk you through this. Let's ignore this for the moment being. I'll explain this in a second. Up in our controller, we passed in this object HTTP, and you can pass it in. Angular gives it to you for free, and you just got to declare it if you want to use it. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to basically, you can think of it as kind of like your AJAX call, if you want. It allows you to go out to a service, and so what you do is you specify the URL that you want to get. So it might be local, it might be somewhere, somewhere else, and you can pass in a config. Now, this object that you pass in here, when you're getting, because I'm getting here, it allows you, when we're passing in config here, for example, this is an object where you might set headers. You might set any kind of stuff that you need. Maybe you have an authorization. Maybe you have a username and a password.
Okay.
Something, basic authorization, for example. You can create an object, list out all those things, and then pass it into this item. And then it kind of works the same way that we saw that your stuff worked, very much based on a promise.
Yes.
Right? So it says, okay, so when this is done, then do this, otherwise do that.
Yeah.
Right? And so what happens is I say, and I'm not necessarily catching the error here, but what happens when this is done, and once again, if you're looking at the syntax and you're a little confused by then, or like you saw, success or error or complete,
Right.
Those kind of things, especially if you see then, you're kind of dealing with promises.
We're going to kind of chain things together.
Search for the promise, the idea of the promise in JavaScript, and you'll see what your ability is, what those things are. So when this is done and you're giving me the result, I'm logging out the result, and then I'm setting the data from that result to that array that we had of people, right? And so what I need to do is I just now need to basically see if this is going to work, right? Oh, I did what we do every time, which is try to run the JavaScript. Okay, so let's see, and boom, there you go, everything, right?
All right.
So in 2 or 3 minutes, I got from a template. Now, for example, name, location. Maybe I want to change the way this looks. I could change that li element. I could totally add formatting. I could do whatever I want. But you're starting to see that it just automatically starts to go and populate, and it creates all those elements automatically for me, and I don't need to worry about it. So what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to show you quickly how to filter those items.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say I only want to show people who are from New York, because that's how I roll.
Okay, I understand. Hey, I'm from New York, so I wonder if that includes me.
So what you can do is there's a filter object.
A little pipe.
And you basically say filter, and then you can say location. So you filter on the property you're looking at. Yeah. Right? And hopefully, like I said, this will work. And what I say is for every person and people, filter out based on, or filter and only show me the people from this location, NYC. Now, filter, you can add in custom patterns. You can just check for someone with the name, like a letter in the name. Yeah. You can do a lot of stuff out of the box, and you can do a lot of custom stuff too. Okay. So I am curious to see if we're only going to see New York entries. Again, boom. Wow, only see New York entries. Go. So very easy. Imagine a list of items that's just going like New York, New Jersey, whatever. See, see by region, for example. See by name. You can filter those things quite easily.
Yeah. kind of took me a little while to get used to the syntax there, but the way I look at it is you have person in people, and you have a little pipe.
Yeah.
I make it look like you're squeezing the people through that pipe, and that's where the filter is happening.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
And again, you can have your own custom filters. Basically, you creating a function that writes the logic and then returns what you need to do, and that's very, very similar to a lot of other languages that work that kind of way, where you're doing those kind of patterns. So it looks like I might have took a little too much time with my...
So we knew that Angular was going to take some time.
With that bit. So I think that we might just have to kind of, cut it there a little bit. But having said that, I've gone through, you can see the add user. The example that we have up on our GitHub does add user. Once again, instead of this HTTP request here, get, you actually do a post.
Okay.
And you put the URL in, you put the data you want to post in, and then you put the actual config if you need a config, and it will go and post it. So all that stuff is working and in the repository that you can kind of play with. But this gives you the sense of, some very, very basic things in terms of Angular, in terms of posting and getting data, creating a module, creating a controller. The other, there's a couple other things that you can do that's quite easy that Angular has built in. If you want to show and hide an element, you no longer have to worry about writing jQuery for it. You don't have to worry about CSS. You basically just write the, the ng dash show, and then you give it, you can give it, say, sure, you can say, hey, if there's no items in people, don't show me.
Right, so that much less garbage you have to actually create as well. Yeah,
so you start to find yourself working very, very much within the UI in terms of just stating things and the behavior happening behind the page. So sorry that I wasted your time and just writing a bunch of code right there that necessarily didn't work, but I tried my best at live coding.
We were looking at getting our hands dirty and coding the whole time, so this is just what the people wanted.
So there you go. But once again, repository, it's all there. You can take a look. And I'll probably be putting a couple tags up there in terms of, I'll show you services. I'll show, I'll build on the example a little bit to show you more complexity. And I think that's all we've got for Angular. So that's your intro. Do you feel like you have enough to kind of like get running a little bit?
You know what? I think between the jQuery and the Angular side, we should be good to go. And the next session, we're going to wrap things up, come around the home stretch, and actually show you how to take all the content you wrote today and deploy it to Azure as a website for you to use in the end.
Which is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I'm looking forward to it. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
Thanks.